Yes.
Mr. Evans, my questions are going to dot around from topic to topic because they reflect some further matters I've been asked to raise with you arising out of your evidence. The first is just about the end of your period at the Mcfarland Trust. What was it that led you to resign as chair from the Mcfarland Trust?
Well, we'd had the Department of Health had called a meeting regarding how to plan the way forward with a view to making the changes with the Alliance House organisations. And one thing which came out of that meeting was that a reference group would be set up, which we agreed would not include any of the chairmen. So Christopher Podden, Peter Stevens and I were there, and Jan Barlow. And it was seen as a way of getting some a different perspective on the way forward. Nothing happened for a while, and then I was on the way to a meeting with Jan in the office on the train, and I got a phone call from Christopher Pond saying, could I nominate some trustees to be on that reference group? So I think I must have asked him who was chairing it, and he said he was. So anyway, a day or two afterwards, I got, with a little bit of difficulty, I saw the terms of reference, which had no Mcfarland trustees on at all, 3 or 4, I forget the exact number, from the Caxton Foundation and various other people unknown to me from other organisations. And I was actually not happy with that, not because I wanted to be on there, contrary to what the Mcfarland Trust Board subsequent minutes said, but we did agree that it would be a level playing field without any chairs on there. And with one of my colleagues chairing it, I couldn't see how it would be able to give an objective view and how it would be possible to be able to justify to the Mcfarland Trust beneficiaries that in fact there was an objective way forward being looked at, particularly as I knew that Jan had been lobbying for the Caxton Foundation to take over the Mcfarland Trust, and I just could not see how I could justify to the beneficiaries that that was the right way forward. And I suppose I'd lost some trust in Jan, which was a great shame because she and I had worked extremely well together, and I did feel that I was being kept in the dark. I was due to stand down as the chair, I think the following July, and in fact I was due to have stood down already, so I had agreed to an extension. But so that was a reason, but it was with sadness as much as anything that I decided to do it, but I didn't see how I could justify what was being done with the beneficiary community.
Now, one issue the inquiry is investigating is the question of what happened to what was left of the Mcfarland Trust's reserves, and there's an issue over the transfer of those reserves to the Terence Higgins Trust. That's after you left, but prior to the time...
Are you just leaving the last...
I am, sir, yes.
I wonder if I could just ask you to go to your first witness statement, 3859001. At paragraph 41, which is, do you know which page it is?
Page before the end, Shobik.
41. Now, I think Jan Barlow had a break, and then you say soon after she returned, it became apparent that while she was away, plans were being developed for the future of the services behind my back, probably with her participation. And then you say you overheard her advocating to Department of Health officials that Caxton take over Mcfarland. So this appears to think that you'd lost trust, is one way of putting it, as you just have done. Did you think that she was, as it were, undermining you or
Well, yes, I did. I mean, that wasn't a practice I'd noticed with Jam before. So I've, as I said just now, had a lot of time really. But there was that period towards the end. She probably had a difficult time. There was a change of chairman at the time, and she'd been off. But I did feel I was being undermined. Yes.
And you say that the plans were being developed probably with her participation. Now, that suggests you didn't actually know, but you are coming to an assumption. Is that right?
Well, whilst Jan was off for a long time, I think I could say that she was off for a long time, and I know that she was having contact with the chair of the Caxton Foundation, but I made a number of attempts to speak to her because there were day-to-day matters I wanted to talk about, and somehow there was no contact, and that made me suspicious as to what was whether she was involved in what I've described here. But I had no evidence to support that.
So the evidence was simply that she wasn't in contact with you, as much as she might have been.
Well, she wasn't in contact at all for several months.
Yes, I see. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm sorry, you have to start again.
Yes, I will.
Next question.
So one of the matters that the inquiry is investigating in relation to the Mcfarland Trust is what happened to its reserves, its residual reserves, what was left at the end, and their transfer to the Terence Higgins Trust. That was after you'd left. My question is whether prior to you leaving, you'd ever participated in any discussions about what might happen to reserves if and when the trust was dissolved.
No, I'm fairly sure there was no discussion I was involved in at all.
Now, I asked you before lunch about your reference to there having been a deteriorating relationship between the Trust and the Haemophilia Society over the 12 months or so prior to your letter to Bernard Manson. And you referred to, or that, as I understand it, was based upon your understanding of Jan Barlow's meetings with Mrs. Carroll. Did you have any understanding of how much contact Mrs. Carroll and Miss Barlow had over that 12-month period?
No, but I would have expected either in person or telephone calls or emails, quite a lot. I wouldn't like to try and quantify it. I can't do that.
And can you recall anything specific that Miss Barlow said to you about either Mrs. Carroll or the Haemophilia Society, which led to your conclusion that there had been a deteriorating relationship?
Well, certainly there was the issue which she raised with me about the unwillingness of the Haemophilia Society to campaign to enable more money to be available. That certainly came up.
So Ms. Barlow raised with you, as a result of her interactions with Mrs. Carroll, the what Ms. Barlow perceived as an unwillingness of the Haemophilia Society to campaign for more funding. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, just to get into context, I mean, if she were having a meeting or had spoken to Ms. Carroll, it would have been a casual. When we had a catch-up meeting, I might have asked her how she got on, or she might have said, "Oh, she had this meeting," and so forth. So it was raised in that way rather than what might sound as a sort of formal way.
Did you ever raise this issue with Bernard Manson, with whom you said you had a good relationship? The issue of the Haemophilia Society not, in your view, campaigning sufficiently for more funding?
Yes, I did, soon after he came into post.
Okay. Are you able to assist roughly when that was and what his response was?
I would think 2012.
And can you recall what his response was?
I think it was a neutral one. He listened to what I had to say, and he was to some extent on a learning curve, as he put it, was words to that effect. We had this meeting partly because he wanted to understand the community better, and we met up somewhere and had tea together, a cup of tea together.
Was it something that you raised subsequently to your at your first meeting with Mr. Manson?
I can't remember. I would expect I did, but I cannot remember.
And then specifically in relation to the issue of the meeting on the 29th of January and the events that followed, did you obtain the approval of the Mcfarland Board of Trustees for the steps that were taken in terms of the sending of the solicitors' letters and the various letters that then flowed between solicitors?
Absolutely, every step.
You referred yesterday to the loyalty you expected, or we looked at a document in which you'd referred to the loyalty that you might expect Department of Health appointed trustees to show in their decisions as Mcfarland Trust trustees. At the time of the dispute with Mrs. Carroll, when there were, I think, 2 Haemophilia Society appointed trustees on the board, and without mentioning any names, do you recall whether they supported the Mcfarland Trust instructing solicitors, or was there any disagreement within the board as to the right course?
But what I recall is every step of action we took was supported unanimously by the board.
Was the board meeting that discussed the issue of the letter and the legal proceedings, was that in person or was that done remotely?
Well, there was at least one meeting in person, because as soon as this came to light, I convened a meeting as soon as I could, within the day, or well, if it weren't within the day, it would be 2 days. It was that quick. So it was an extraordinary meeting. Whether I called it as a board meeting or had the board members there without it being a formal board, I cannot remember. But I think if you go through the board minutes at that time, probably in the private part of the minutes, I think you will find it well documented.
So it should have been a minuted meeting in any event?
Yes.
I asked you earlier about partnership group meetings. Once those partnership group meetings came to an end, whether for a period of time, a short period of time or a long period of time, as they did, what, if anything, replaced this positive face-to-face engagement with beneficiaries?
Well, I can't talk for what happened between about 2009 and 2012, whenever it was, the first time they ceased. After the second one, we did not put anything in place after the partnership group meetings ended. I think there were 4 meetings, incidentally. I think somewhere it was said 2, but there were 4 meetings of the second sort of wave of partnership group meetings. But after the chair found it really not possible to manage those, I don't think we put anything else in place, and we probably should have tried to do something. I regard that as something we might have done better, but it was very difficult with some of the personality issues amongst the beneficiaries at the time.
When I asked you this morning about the grant application decision-making process and issues relating to means testing, you referred to a point in time at which I don't know whether that was the NSSC or the board, but I don't think it matters, felt some were buying luxuries on mail order. Against what criteria did the committee or trustees assess purchases as luxury?
Well, I mean, it was not something where we had specific, shall we say, criteria. But for instance, there more than one beneficiaries who claim money were spending money on some very expensive trainers for their children. It was that sort of thing where I don't think you can necessarily put a definition against such like. But I mean, it really came to a head when we had situations like that, and people then couldn't afford to pay their utility bills or council taxes. I mean, not for us to decide whether someone buys an expensive pair of trainers, but if it then impinges on their having other payment difficulties, then clearly if they're asking us to pay for them, then we do have an interest. And in situations like that, we did what we could to try and help people as far as they would wanted us to help with their managing their financial affairs.
Who paid for the money management advisors to whom the Mcfarland Trust would require some applicants to be referred for financial and money management advice? How was that funded?
Well, the Mcfarland Trust, going back a long way, had some sort of contractual relationship with those people. So when say beneficiary was was being helped in say that way, then it would be paid by from the trust's funds. It wouldn't be something which would be having to be paid for instance, by the beneficiary.
To what extent do you consider, over the years that you were involved with the Mcfarland Trust, that the children of those who were infected were adequately supported?
Well, within the guidelines and such like, we had, as we talked about earlier, there were ways in which we could support them. We would support them, which may not be in the guidelines, I can't remember, with support with, say, some secondary, university type education, secondary education, buying computers and stuff like that, things like that. So we did support them in a lot of ways.
Did the Trust ever, in the time that you were involved, consider providing any form of support to children who were now adults once they'd completed their any tertiary education?
Well, I know there were discussions, certainly the NSSC when I was on there, about certain applications which came in and whether it would be appropriate for us to support them. And I think many cases were rather different. I mean, we didn't have a sort of cut-off age where when someone got to a certain age, we wouldn't support them. But it did need, we looked at each situation on its merits. I don't recall we had many. We had a few, as I was alluding to just now, with people wanting further education after school. I don't think we had a huge number, but we certainly were very willing to consider and help with those if appropriate. And we clearly had quite a lot from secondary education.
You referred to, when I asked you about how you got to know Mcfarland Trust beneficiaries, you referred to your enjoyment of the weekends away. Why did funding for those weekends come to an end?
Well, it came to an end when the Department of Health was pressurising us on our budget, and some of which we talked about yesterday. And I know we discussed at the board what the priorities were for funding, and it was very clear we needed to make sure regular funding, there was a grant budget there, and several previous possibilities we stopped because we felt we couldn't afford them. I think one of the issues with the weekends away is that, and as I said, I welcomed them. I thought they were very helpful. But with each one, there were probably 20 or 30 people there. Quite often, some of the same ones came, which is absolutely fine. I'm not saying anything against that. But when we had about 700 or so beneficiaries to support, when we were financially tight, then the view of the board was that was not sadly one we could continue with.
In the course of the questions I've asked you, there have been, I think, a couple of references to the culture of the Mcfarland Trust. And I think it may have come up when we were talking about the possibility of an interim chief executive after Mr. Harvey was unable to continue. How would you characterise the culture of the Mcfarland Trust during your time there?
Well, let me say, first of all, I enjoyed my time enormously. I was very proud that I was able to be part of helping a group of a particular group of people with their problems. I mean, the culture was very much one of wanting to give help and support to the beneficiary community, and although I'm quite sure some would disagree with that, I think we did that extremely well within the constraints we were faced with. Did we get everything right? Well, I'm sure we didn't. Couldn't be expected to get everything right. But I think culturally our attitude was towards supporting them. And it was difficult when there was a group of a relatively small group of people who seemed to think that we were doing the antithesis of that. It certainly wasn't the case. What I think, I don't know how far you want me to go into this now, what I think was difficult was the Mcfarland Trust was, in my opinion, good at dealing with giving financial support to the beneficiary community, but when one looks at the initial constitution, there was almost an add-on about providing other support. Well, we were okay at doing that with things like financial advice, but what we weren't really doing very well for the beneficiary community was providing non-financial support issues like, say, counselling and so forth, and we weren't really equipped and probably didn't have the right resources and probably not the right body to be doing that. So, sorry, that's a long answer, but the culture was one of wanting to support the community, and if you asked the 700 beneficiaries, whatever the number was, I think you will find that the vast majority of those will say that we did it to their satisfaction.
When the issue arose relating to the letter tabled by Mr. Mcfarland at the January 2013 board meeting, did you not consider your role as being one to try and understand the conflicting views of trustees on the letter, to try and mediate between contrasting views, resolve the conflict, or offer an alternative solution?
Well, I think a few things on that. I mean, it would have been helpful if Mr. Mcfarland had given me notice he wanted to raise a letter, and B, to share the draft with me, and we could have endeavoured to put together a letter which the board might agree. But I don't think it would have been possible to mediate with a letter which required the signature of all 9 trustee board members saying we resign if we're not given more money, or whatever the wording was. I haven't obviously got in front of me now. It wasn't that sort of letter. And I was not prepared to sign the letter, as I already said, and say we'd had a majority. And I do believe we didn't have a majority at the meeting. Only 3 people seem to be in support. Even if we had a majority of, say, 5-4 or 6-3 or whatever, it still would not have been appropriate to ask those who were not happy with the letter still to sign it, because they were signing to resign.
Just going back to something you said a few moments ago, Mr. Evans, on my previous question, what's the factual basis for your view that the vast majority of Mcfarland Trust beneficiaries would have been, I can't remember the precise words, but essentially happy with the way in which the Mcfarland Trust dealt with them?
Yes, but there were another group who were very vocal, and so they're very entitled to be vocal, who were not.
Forgive me. Let me make my question clearer. What's the factual basis for your view? What's the evidence for your view that the vast majority were satisfied?
I think if you several, one is my contact with beneficiaries at events like the Weekends Away. I think that came out of the work which Kate did, Kate Evans as she was. There were some rather different results with the APPG survey, which, as I said earlier on, was very much welcomed. But we discovered with the APPG that it was possible, and indeed happening, that some people were actually posting their negative views more than once. So we didn't see that as being one. But most people, when we gave them money, were grateful, and they found the system one which supported to them. But to some extent, it was word of mouth. I'm very confident that was the situation.
Did you ever seek the views of the Charity Commission or seek legal advice on the issues that were, to some extent, raised in that chain of emails we looked at yesterday, whether the Mcfarland Trust was a de facto arm of government, what the powers of the Mcfarland Trust were, how it should manage its relationship with the Department of Health?
I can't recall that we did.
In your applications to the Department of Health for more funding, did you ever seek to make the moral case that more should be paid because the needs of the beneficiaries had, unlike other demands on the department, been created by the NHS?
Yes. And I think the Department of Health was very worried about being exposed to that.
And how was that moral case advanced? Was it in the written business cases or at meetings or otherwise?
It was certainly in meetings. Whether it was in written documents, I can't recall.
Can you recall
but
how
the Department of Health were very clear of our position on that?
Do you recall how the Department of Health responded to you when that moral case was articulated?
Well, they didn't like it, basically. I'm not sure it's the right word to use, but I will. So that they seemed to cower when it was raised. As I think I said in my one of my evidence, the 4th of February, that the Mcfarland Trust was a useful cushion for the department with the beneficiary community, and if we were to be seen in any way to try and expose them, which we did sometimes, but if we did, then the Department of Health found that very difficult.
I asked you this morning about your involvement in the setting up of the Caxton Foundation. You have, in the course of your evidence and in your written evidence, articulated a number of concerns about the way the Mcfarland Trust was structured and set up. Why was it that you then adopted a similar model for the Caxton Foundation in light of the difficulties you knew existed in terms of the Mcfarland Trust and its ability to manage properly the relationship with the Department of Health?
Well, we wanted and we were expected to set up the Caxton Foundation to pay money out to people with hepatitis C very quickly, because and we wanted to do that. Sooner we could pay money, the better for the beneficiary community. All we really had to fall back on was the Mcfarland Trust, and much of the structure I think was fit for purpose, was satisfactory, but a lot could be improved. When I left the Caxton Foundation, then it was still a very underdeveloped structure and organisation, and I think after that there would have been opportunities to make it better. But what we didn't have time to do was to do a more cerebral look initially at what might be another better organisation.
In relation to the Mcfarland Trust, can you assist with this? In what circumstances were vouchers issued by the Mcfarland Trust in response to grant applications?
Well, I know, I can't remember the detail. Vouchers were issued for, I think, two reasons. One was there were some arrangements where beneficiaries could get preferential prices because of negotiations which I presumably Mcfarland Trust had done to buy certain goods, and I think white goods might have been one of them, but I'm guessing. And some other beneficiaries who maybe found financial management difficult did in fact quite like the idea of vouchers for specific goods rather than giving them money to buy them. I mean, it was I was never convinced it was a good thing.
In terms of the long-term funding issue, you referred in your evidence, I think yesterday, to having obtained an actuarial assessment and there being options considered for the long-term future of funding for the beneficiary community. And I just want to touch on that, perhaps pick it up with a couple of documents. Seamus, if we go to MACF 5012_127, please. I'm not going to go through all the documents that we have relating to it, but I just want to try and work out what happened to the proposal. So the minutes of a board meeting 27th of October 2008. If we go to page 7, please. And we look at the bottom of the page, we can see there the heading, the Long-Term Funding Working Party. That's what you were talking about, I think. Is that correct, Mr. Evans?
That's correct, yes.
And we can see that you present this agenda item as chair of the Long-Term Funding Working Party, and then there's reference to a presentation and the tabling of a report from the actuaries. And if we go over, it said there, there's still further work to be done, it's a work in progress. And if we go over the page, we can see there, picking up a few lines down, the various options considered were, and then the options include reaching a final cash settlement. And then the shortlisted options are final cash settlement or to buy annuities with an insurance company. And there were some costings, estimated costings in relation to that. And then if we go further down the page, we can see it was agreed there was further work to be done and the Long-Term Funding Working Party should proceed to the second stage. So that's October 2008. If we then go to MACF 5012_131, please, Seamus. This is also October 2008. It's not a meeting attended by you, Mr. Evans, but it's a Department of Health Mcfarland Trust meeting. If we go to the second page, we can see under the heading long-term funding halfway down the page, there's reference to the Trust having been carrying out some work. It said that in about a month's time the work could be brought to the Department of Health, graphs and other documents to support the need for payments to all the beneficiaries for the rest of their lives. So there's a suggestion there that there's going to be a report submitted to the Department of Health. And then the third and final document before I ask you about this is MACF 5012_097. Minutes of a meeting 26th of January 2009. If we go to page 8, please, Shomek. If we look under the heading at the bottom of the page, Long-Term Funding Working Party, you're not present, but we can see the Chief Executive reporting on an informal meeting you and he have attended with the Department of Health on the 3rd of December. There's reference there to having presented the Department of Health with a copy of the Long-Term Funding Working Party's first stage report. And then if we go to the top of the next page, we see that's I think the Chief Executive, concluded by saying officials had retained a copy of the report for internal discussion, and a follow-up telephone call made on the 21st of January confirmed that the DH were not totally averse to what had been proposed. And then there's the reference to sanctioning a second stage report from the actuaries, but only after DH had responded with their thoughts on the first stage report. And then there's a discussion about the partnership group's view. It's not currently clear, Mr. Evans, at least to me, what happened thereafter. Are you able to assist with whether this plan was then moved forward to some kind of final consideration or second stage, or whether it got essentially set aside in the aftermath of the Archer reforms?
Well, the first document, Ms. Richards, had 4 options, and I do recall that the 4 were the first one of do nothing. We did not think was the right one. Was not viable. I know we looked at the insurance option, and there were difficulties with being able to do that. It might have been with insurance companies, I cannot remember. First Actuary did that for us, and the view, which I'm fairly sure would have been shared by the whole board, but we haven't got the minute of that one, was that the department or the government should make a very significant lump sum payment to each of the beneficiaries rather than continuing with the existing arrangements. And you may recall, I'm sure you will recall, that the MFT was expected to have a life expectancy until about 2012. So there was an issue about that. And I think the figure which we configured in the document to the DH was £100,000 payoff. I know when we had the discussion at the partnership group meeting, and the beneficiaries were asked to give views on, beneficiaries, views on how much they thought the would be a equitable or justifiable payoff, and some of the figures which came out were much bigger than £100,000, and they may be right. Not sure. I'm going to view on that. So when we put it to the department, and this is what if you paid out at least 100,000, this is what it would cost. I think the total cost, I think, scared them, and I think they also picked up that if the hepatitis C beneficiaries were taken into account as well, then they would be faced with a very, very large bill. So they kicked it into the long grass, actually. But I mean, one thing which we push with them, which I think is still of great relevance, is the expectancy if Mcfarland or such like had continued ad infinitum, and there's going to be at least the 2050s before there ceases to be a beneficiary community of primaries, and 2080s before the widows and such and other family members are not likely to be with us. So I think it scared them, the sums of money, and I think they were more prepared to, by putting it to the long grass, to worry about what will be happening in sometime in the future, rather than grasping the issue now, which I think was a great shame. Whether it reached ministerial level or not, I don't think I ever knew.
Did you ever get?
So that's why we didn't go onto the stage 2.
Do you recall if the Mcfarland Trust ever got a formal response from the Department of Health?
No, I don't. I think we may have got a formal response. I'm fairly sure we got a response at one of the liaison meetings where we've talked about minutes earlier, but I cannot tell you which one. We certainly discussed the whole of the report at one of those meetings.
Okay. We can take that down. Thank you, Shamik. You just going back to the question of Ms. Barlow and something you said in your statement. You said in your witness statement, Mr. Evans, that in private you encouraged Ms. Barlow to soften her style, which you described as a business-like style. Ms. Barlow, when asked about this by me, said she didn't know what that referred to. Can you provide us with any further assistance as to what, if any, concerns you had about Ms. Barlow's style, whether that in particular impacted upon her interaction with beneficiaries, and the respects in which you encouraged a change of style?
Well, Jan was a great benefit to the Mcfarland Trust, and came in at a time where, with great difficulty, because of what had happened with Martin, and there'd been a delay, interregnum, and so there was no chance for her to meet with him. She introduced much more efficient ways of working that had been there before Martin, as I think I used the word avuncular in somewhere in my statement, and in that is probably quite a good description of it. But because Jan had this very sort of proper way of doing things, shall we say, and she wasn't, Martin, if there was a beneficiary who was upset about something or disagreed, he might well have a glass of wine with them or something. Now, that was not Jan's style, and I empathise with that completely. And so I think she was coming over as being rather intimidating to beneficiaries. She wasn't really, but I think it came over that way with some of them, and it was quite difficult because that was her personality and the way she worked. But I put that in my statement. I don't know if I've ever said that to anyone else before, because it was certainly part of our, several private discussions.
Final two questions, Mr. Evans, from me. Did your background as an NHS insider, someone who'd worked within the NHS for many years, and your closeness to the Department of Health display itself as in an undue reluctance to criticise or challenge the Department of Health?
Well, I don't think in that context, I don't think my NHS background was relevant. I wasn't close within the Department of Health to those who were involved with the departments we were dealing with. I had met Elsa White and possibly Rowena Gcott before, but the Department of Health is a very, very big organisation. I don't know how many thousands of people it employs, and I was mainly working with arm's length bodies and with a department they had in in Leeds, although I did have some contact with the chief medical officer. So there was no conflict of interest, and I think there was benefits to the Mcfarland community that I did have some good understanding of the way the department thought and operated, and the way ministers likewise, and that was partly the bone of contention over the issue of whether we should be campaigning or what we should be doing to get more money, where I strongly, sincerely believe the way to do it was tough negotiating not in a public way, and I brought that, as it were, to my approach. Other people might have done differently, of course.
Irrespective of the cause, so leaving aside any question of your background working within the NHS, do you think that your period of chairmanship was, as a matter of fact, characterised by an undue reluctance to criticise or challenge the Department of Health?
Well, I can't remember Christopher Fitzgerald criticising the Department of Health or getting involved in campaigning, so I don't think my style was any different than the one I inherited.
So those are the questions I'm asking from core participants and recognised legal representatives.
Yes, well, I have one or two questions. One of the problems with having so many questions addressed to you over a couple of days is we may lose focus quite easily on some things. So what I want to bring to light through your evidence to me is some of your underlying views and principles, you personally. Now, as I understand it, you had a considerable sympathy with the people who were beneficiaries, and you thought they had been wronged. Is that
Absolutely.
Right?
Correct.
So you thought they had a justifiable cause.
Correct.
Indeed, you've expressed the view that you would like this inquiry to result in compensation to them rather than a scheme of payments.
Realistic compensation levels, yes.
You took the view that the Mcfarland Trust was, at the very outset, not fit for purpose. I think you've described it as it was not the way in which the government should have been administering funds to support the infected and affected. It should have been administering funding directly and not through arm's length bodies such as the MFT.
Correct.
In fact, let's have a look at it. It's your witness statement, your second written statement, witness 3859002. And can we go to paragraph 22, please? It's page 6. And it says, understandably, many of the beneficiaries manifested anger and dissatisfaction at the form of action taken by government. As I understand it, early on, lump sum payments were made to those affected by the government, and you go through the outcome of a legal case. And you say this, discretionary payments were made through what was termed an ex gratia scheme, through the legal structure of charities registered with the Charity Commission. That's how the MFT and I think other AHOs were set up. I may be wrong, but I have the impression that with the early, grim medical prognosis for HIV, successive governments viewed this as a relatively short-term issue. And that is how you saw it, is it?
That's the impression I was given, yes.
And the impression you not only were given,
I recognised it, yeah.
And
Sorry.
you not only met, but you liked quite a number of the beneficiaries you had met.
Oh, hugely. And I liked probably all, but certainly most of the ones who put in critical criticisms of me.
You fully understood why they should criticise you, given that, as you put it in paragraph 22, that understandably many manifested anger and dissatisfaction at the form of action taken by the government.
Yes, and in many respects, the only place they could turn to vent their feelings and anger about the government and the Department of Health was the Mcfarland Trust, because we were between them and the department.
I think the way you put it
was regrettable.
The way you put it, at paragraph 24, if we can just scroll down, please, Shumik, the very last sentence of paragraph 24. As I mentioned below, but this summarises it, it felt as though the MFT operated as a punching bag or cushion between the MFT beneficiaries and the government.
That's right.
You thought that begging was not something which this group of beneficiaries should be doing.
Correct, and it was one of the reasons why I thought the Mcfarland Trust, being a charity, gave the wrong connotation.
You thought that to subject them to a means test in order to receive something in their begging bowl was demeaning and humiliating.
Correct.
That it wasn't right that there should be something like an income and expenditure account setting out all those details simply as a precondition of payment.
Correct, and some other much more intrusive questions which we were asking.
You thought that their concerns needed to be taken seriously and properly addressed.
Correct.
You accept the need that in dealing with the grants which you were able within your means to make as the trust, that there was a need for clarity, transparency and consistency.
Correct.
Now, I've asked you for your views. I want you now not to regard this as a personal question, but one in respect of the trust itself. How satisfied are you that within the 5.5 years that you were chair of the board, the MFT, that is not you personally, but the trust, actually demonstrated those views in practice?
Well, quite a lot I will say on that, Sir Brad. First of all, if we can talk about some demonstration with money, because I think that's relevant. During the time I was the chair, and with the MFET, we made available over £30 million. We made available, I've forgotten the sum of money, a considerable sum of money for improvements to people's homes. And we advanced with much larger non-discretionary payments, which meant that we at least reduced the need for beneficiaries to come with a begging bowl. And although that did not, although we not completely got rid of that, to some extent during that time we had given them more opportunity to make decisions on their own lifestyles and spending matters rather than having to come to us for relatively cheap things. I think we did that. I think we probably give us 5 out of 10 for our engagement on a softer basis with the beneficiary community than we were doing before. And I think the vast majority would accept that, can I say, we were on their side and we want to do the best we possibly could. Of course, some didn't necessarily agree with what we wanted to do. Others were never convinced we were on their side, although we were. And of course, there were ways of wanting to do it differently, and this campaigning issue is probably the big one. And I think during the time I was chair, I think, and it was a great privilege being the chair, I think a lot was achieved. There's no way anyone probably could have achieved everything. Where was the area which we could have done better? It would have been relationship and communication with the beneficiary community. How could we have done that? Well, even now, I'm not sure, because it takes us back to the point about the anger and so forth which people had. But I'm sure there are things we didn't try which we could have done. And I think almost to a person, well, probably to a person actually, whilst I was on the board, all the trustees who were there were committed to helping the beneficiary community. And occasionally there seemed to be suspicions that we were wanting to do them down in some way. And that was definitely not the case. And I would not have given, and I'm grateful I did it, eventually 10 years of my life voluntarily working in what was not an easy environment for lots of reasons, if I did not wish to do the best I possibly could in supporting them. And I think a reasonable job was done by the board, and obviously including myself, with dealing with grants and so forth. And we only had a budget between £2 and £3 million a year, but I think within that we did a good job. And I'm also disappointed, but there is a certain satisfaction with the work which I was able to do. And sorry, I'm being a bit personal, I beg your pardon, I realise what I've done now. With the long-term working, I think we found a way forward which would have enabled not to have the situation which may still be prevalent, and that's strategic thinking, together with the part I played, partly when I was with the Haemophilia Society and Archer, and actually giving people a better living environment, a wage.
You saw a need, I think, as well. Am I right in thinking you saw a need for the fund, the trust rather, to deliver more than mere finance?
Yes, I mean, I've given it quite a lot of thought, but I wouldn't pretend what I'm going to say is over-considered. But either initially or some way down the track, a few years, I think what would have been would have dealt with partly, hopefully, with my fit for purpose statement, is that the department or government should have had a way of making payments in the right way, more directly from central government. I mean, I don't know, an arm's length body might have been the way, or it may have been in a department. But I think together with that, there should have been some other way of dealing with the other needs. And with that, I include psychological needs and counselling, which the community badly needed. And to some extent, the manifestation of their feelings, I'm not using that as an excuse for all the problems we had, but the manifestation of their feelings was being levied at the Mcfarland Trust, and we really were not in a very good position to do that. Now, I knew quite a lot about HIV and AIDS in the 1980s because I was running a hospital at the time where we had a number of patients. But so I do know what stresses that would cause people, particularly if it was combined with haemophilia. Now, counselling and such like might not have been the order of the day in 1988 as much as it is today, but somewhere along the line, it should have been recognised that there was a huge need for this population of people, in some cases much greater than financial need, but it was never dealt with.
You believed, I have the sense, but you can tell me if this is right or wrong, that you had a belief in the public sector and the ethic of service.
I worked in the public sector since I was age 17.
Well, that's not quite the same as having a belief in it.
Oh, well, I would have left it yes, I have. Yes, I would have left otherwise. And I also have a belief in charities, because I have been, in terms of running charities and that such like, yes, very much I have a belief in the public services. I think they're fundamental to the to the country.
And am I right that generally you took the view that there was much more to be gained by constructive dialogue than by confrontation?
Absolutely. I mean, if I don't want to go back on my evidence particularly, but I said, I think yesterday, it was never really clear by those who are advocating campaigning, what were we campaigning for, how was the campaigning going to be done, and who were we going to be campaigning with. So I could well see that if that had happened and taken place, then it would very easily become very rugged and unseemly. And in my experience, that is not the way you get governments to provide money. Also, the Mishcon letter, as we keep calling it, which we keep coming back. Well, in my experience, if you say to the department, central government, well, if you don't give us more money, we're going to resign en bloc, then they're not going to give you more money, because someone else is going to come along and say the same. And the proper way is to reason and be tough with them, in which we were. And there was a role which could have been better used by politicians, MPs, and I'm not particularly criticising them on that, to lobby ministers and the Prime Minister along through the years. I mean, reading the statement of Witness 1122, who there were difficulties developed with our relationship, but is a man I knew well and is respectful of. There's a frustration coming through his statement where he's seen MPs, and right up to when David Cameron was the Prime Minister, and he was given grounds for optimism with his colleagues along the way, and none of that came to fruition. And he thought it was, and so I think that I'm not sure. I'm talking quite a lot on this. I'm very committed to public services, and sorry, this sounds very hackneyed, and actually helping people who have problems and needs.
And constructive dialogue is what you've been talking about.
Exactly. Yes.
Understanding the other person's point of view and putting your own in that context.
Correct, and that's in my DNA for my work. I mean, if the Mcfarland Trust had wanted to someone more cavalier in their approach, then I wouldn't have been the person for the job.
Now, there may seem to some to be something of a conflict between your approach to the Department of Health and the seeking of constructive dialogue, so they understood your position, you understood theirs, and the approach which you took when dealing with those people who came in order to see the Caxton Trust in what has been described as an intrusion. Well, leave aside how it is properly to be described. it might be said that your approach to them was not that of constructive dialogue and seeking to understand their point of view. What would you have to say to them?
Well, they had no reason to have come into the office in the way in which they did. If they had issues they wanted to raise, then they should have done so, suggesting some proper meeting instead of coming in and frightening the staff.
I mean, the suggestion there might be that in the light of your approach generally to people such as the DHSS from whom you wanted money, that those who wanted money from you or help from you, you might have taken a similar approach and understood why it was they were doing what they were doing, particularly since you've told me how you understood the anger and the frustration which many of the beneficiaries had, and you've quite prepared in your earlier answers anyway to make allowances for those who tended to take their frustrations out on you personally.
Well, several points on that, Sir Brian. I mean, first of all, the people who came into the office, I'm afraid I don't know the numbers, with the exception of one, were all Caxton Foundation beneficiaries. And as I recall, the grievances were about Caxton and they wanted to express their view that way. What would I have done if it had been a Mcfarland Trust group of individuals? I've never really thought that through. It might have depended who they were, whether we'd already heard the grievances. I think what you've just said now would have been a mature, sensible way to have engaged with them. But I partly come back to what I said in another point to you just now, that a message doesn't need to get around, and if you break into the office, you're going to have a meeting with the chairman. You know, it needs handling quite carefully. So, yeah, I think that's one said.
The atmosphere at the time that you met Ms. Carroll, in general terms, I think it was this, was it, that Archer had not long since reported, and there had been a change in the way in which money was being delivered, that Penrose was awaited with bated breath, and that the APPG, there was pressure on the Prime Minister, I think, at the time, to make a statement. So the political mood music was moving towards something which might result in better achievement of the objectives which you've told us you sympathise with. Can you help, against that background, and bearing in mind what you've said about your thinking that when the MFT was set up, your assumption, your belief that it was something which was intended to be short-lived only, for no other reason than that the beneficiaries would have, at that time, a short lifespan, or would be thought to have, that you may have made some reference to that in passing, do you think, informally at the meeting, and it might have been misunderstood?
Definitely not. I would have fought away from making any point about life expectancy and such like, because I would have seen it would have been a hot potato. And what is suggested, I don't believe anyway. So, no, I
follow that. But you will understand that one of the things which I have to reflect on is whether there may have been something said along the lines of, well, of course, the trust was only ever set up for a short-term fix, because, or the implication being as it was, something along those lines, by somebody at the meeting, and may have been misconstrued?
Well, it's not a comment I tended to make about the life expectancy of the Mcfarland Trust.
Even though you had the underlying
I'm certain, almost certain. I mean, that I would not have said that.
Almost certain.
Because, well, I can't remember every word I said every meeting. You know, that's what I'm saying when I say almost certain. I'm not hinting that I might have said it. I mean, you know, I can't remember everything I said at an informal meeting, 5-6 years ago. You know, that's all I meant. But rather than just being emphatic, I mean, I was very emphatic with Ms. Richardson's questions because that was absolutely true. You know, and as you probably gather, I do actually feel very strongly about it. I mean, do stop me if you want me to. If you with that particular occasion now. Jan Barlow did not make a statement, and I did not. But Ms. Carroll, it seems, said that Jan Barlow made the statement and not me. So if you just sideline the Jan situation for a moment, there's the chief executive of the Haemophilia Society writing a letter to the minister, the Secretary of State, everybody else about me. Making a statement
I've got that point.
And that was part of what my emotions were about. But no, I only said what I said about almost because what words do you use? You know? But I did not.
Now, the final question I've got for you is very different. It's just about the staffing arrangements. My understanding is that when the staff who had been working for MFT were transferred over to the Caxton Fund, that was on the basis that they would go on doing the same work in broadly the same capacity. But now they'll be managed by one manager who would manage both the Caxton and the Mcfarland interests. Is that a proper characterization?
Yes, more or less. More or less. I mean, for instance, there was a finance manager who was working for Mcfarland Trust and also for Skipton and Eileen. And when the staff transferred in Caxton clearly needed some staff to do their work, for which they paid. We did not pay anything for that. So, for instance, in that case, the finance manager had an assistant, so they worked as a team. So my recollection is that part of the finance manager's work then was Caxton, part MFT and whatever with the assistant. So jobs changed a bit, but not fundamentally.
Well, thank you very much. Ms. Richards, did you have something more to ask?
I don't, and I understand that Mr. Evans's counsel does not have any questions that he wishes to ask. So, Mr. Evans, is there anything further you would wish to say?
No, I did want to make the remarks I made to Sir Brian about it being a privilege to be involved with the community for so long, and also what I thought was achieved, not just while I was the chair, but also in the time when Christopher Fitzgerald was the chair. Well, but I've said that already.
Your evidence to us has been sometimes reflective. You've explained a lot of the difficulties. And sometimes we forget, particularly after a long day, that in the course of institutions, in the running of institutions, there are people at their heart. And taken together with the evidence of Miss Barlow, you've given us a sense of the different personalities involved here in Mcfarland and to an extent in Caxton. And you've helped us to understand who they were and how they helped the operations to move on. Well, I think also we will, in that light, excuse you for the odd error which you may have made, the one last night after a long day, about reserves and where the reserves were. It's not. It's an answer I shall have to ponder, but there we are. These things do happen, and you've had many questions to answer.
I think I put that one straight this morning.
Can I thank you? Well, I hoped you would. It's all of us make mistakes. Some of them may be revelatory, some are not. And that's something which, as I say, I shall have to think about. But can I thank you for the generally helpful way in which you've given your evidence and how you've explained what your position was and how you sought to achieve your underlying philosophies through the Mcfarland Trust. Thank you.
It's almost been a pleasure, Sir Graham.
Almost.
Being interviewed.
that word again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So we need a short break, 10 minutes or so, to sort out the technical, end this link, set up the link with Mrs. Carroll.
Yes. You can explain to her that it was the length of my question rather than the length of the answers which have delayed us.
Yes. So I think we should be in a position to start at half past 3.
3:30.